Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Barry Spinka, resident of Glenmont. Welcome to the show, Barry.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it.
Now, Barry, you're here to talk to us about gun advocacy. A strong proponent. We'll ask you your position about gun ownership, the Second Amendment. We'll be talking about that in the Bill of Rights, and also specifically how it pertains to the Jewish people, which of course we're always interested to hear about that on the Jewish View. So tell us about your position in gun control, or maybe we should say the opposite of gun ownership.
Gun ownership would probably be closer to the way I feel and the way it seems like a lot of people are feeling. Other than, or I should say, the media and our, at least our president, and some of his cabinet members want to make you think that, well, people out there really don't want to own guns. But that really isn't true. But before we even get into that, one of the things that I believe in, and one of the positions I think that any responsible gun owner believes in, and that's safety. Whether or not, like in this county, you have to go through a safety course, besides all the fingerprinting and everything else that you have to do. I learned how to shoot in California, which doesn't require this. But I still took the safety course because I didn't know how to shoot a gun, and I wasn't about to shoot myself. Yeah, I'd rather shoot the paper, not me. So therefore, you know, that was one of the
just a little
first
bit description of the safety course, just the safe handling of a gun, of just telling you who to shoot, or I mean, when someone comes to get you can't just shoot them. Are they telling you clearly who to shoot or when to shoot in such situations?
Actually, we don't advise shooting anybody. The course that we give, both at the Albany County Pistol Club, which I'm a member of, or anyone in the Albany County Alliance, and there's 5 clubs in the Alliance. Our big thing is how to handle a firearm safely, how to protect others so that there isn't an accidental mischarge or discharge, how to store them safely, how to transport them safely, both within the state and also to other states, because there's a lot of people in our club and in other clubs who are, shall we say, very serious shooters, as far as tournaments, as far as competition. Now, this isn't all of ours. Some of us are recreational shooters, such as myself. I enjoy the sport, but I'm not real concerned if I miss the 10 ring or the X ring by, say, 2 millimeters. Of course, again, one of the main things is gun safety, which is the reason why my tie clip is pointed in a safe direction. I wouldn't want to shoot you, Rabbi.
Thank you for that. Well, that's, again, you can divide it up into 3 categories. There's the hunting people with guns. People want to just shoot the deer, which is a big thing here in New York, of course. And then there's sports, just shooting targets, like just shooting like bowling. You want to shoot the pins right down, so here you're shooting a gun. And then there's the self-defense idea of people saying, well, if anybody comes to my home, I at least have some way of protecting myself. But you got into it because of really the sport of it.
That's true. I got into the sport of it. Also, and I'm sure most responsible gun owners will say, yes, the main purpose is not protection. However, you still, you know, it still is a means of protection, and it's a lot. Hopefully, it's a better deterrent than just waving a white flag and saying, "Excuse me," while I call 911, which, of course, in this county won't work because we don't have a 911. But yeah, those are you're right. Those are the main things. There's hunting, there's target shooting, and there's self-defense. Those are the main, I would say, the 3 main areas.
Now, just maybe for a rabbi to be a devil's advocate, maybe it's not a proper position for a rabbi, but in any case, just throwing out some of the arguments against ownership of guns First of all, that you have guns, then people get shot. That therefore there's more frequent murders. The argument would go that if there would, let's put a total ban on guns, people wouldn't own guns, people wouldn't get killed as often. I don't think anybody thinks that there won't be any more murders in the world, but the crime rate maybe go a lot down.
Actually, that's a falsity that I think the media and also some of the members of this administration are trying to purport. The interesting part is, and this was stated, well, in a couple of sections, but especially by one of the Times writers in the Times Union, December 27th, where he said, actually, we have a twofold type of situation now. And that's Fred LeBon, by the way, is the person I'm referring to. One is, and Fred, if I'm not pronouncing your name, I'm sorry, or mispronouncing it. One is the crime rate has actually gone down overall, countrywide. And two, more people are buying guns than ever before. The first part is we have to take things in proper perspectives. One is, yes, you hear all these things on the media about people getting shot, this one getting murdered, this crazy person, be it down on Long Island or anywhere else. The amount of guns that are used for, or misused, I should say, in any sort of criminal activity is approximately 0.6%. Those that are, this is, by the way, 1990s statistics, as best as I can tell, even though I've got them from the NRA, I believe these are actual FBI numbers. The amount of handguns that are used in any sort of crime is 0.4%. Now, considering there's roughly 200 million guns out, which I think is a conservative number, but in any case, let's assume for a second that there are 200 million handguns. 0.4%. Is a little bit small. I don't see why we're worried about that when 99.6% of the time they're being used in a proper, lawful manner. We have to, I think, one of the things we should address is, which again the media has thrown out, almost as a gauntlet type of situation, and that is the Second Amendment. The concept of the militia, meaning the group, is a 20th century phenomenon.
Just for our listeners, just Second Amendment is just the right to bear arms.
Well,
Bill of Rights.
It's that's one way of looking at it. I mean, that's overextending.
Why aren't that? Oh, you have the whole copy of it?
Yeah, it's because it's very simple.
Right.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now,
that's a quote, quote unquote.
That's a quote. Okay. First of all, a well-regulated militia. Now, the way a lot of people have taken that to mean, in, again, 20th century, is the National Guard. Well, first of all, the National Guard hasn't existed except for the 20th century. So therefore, the militia, they couldn't, Founding Fathers couldn't have meant something that wasn't in existence. And there's quotes by Patrick Henry, there's others, where it is a known fact that what they were referring to was the individual's rights. The right of the people means the individual. All the way through the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution, you're referring to the individual. Let's just take the First Amendment. Again, that refers to the individual's right to speak his piece, assuming it's not in a violent manner, i.e., violent overthrow of the government. Freedom of religion, to practice what the individual wants to practice. Why 14 words later would it be referring just to the group? And then go back to the individual for all the other amendments. It's inconsistent. So therefore, it's the right of the individual. One of the key things, I think, is the whole basis on which our Constitution and our laws were established, and that was based on British common law. Now, one of the things in British common law is the individual is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Why is the law-abiding citizen in his lawful purchase of a firearm considered guilty until proven innocent? It's contradictory, especially when the proponent of the percentage is 99.6% of those who own firearms are using them in a lawful manner.
All right, very good.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to get long-winded.
No, it's good. It's good. You're getting good arguments. I mean, that's what we want to hear. We want to hear these viewpoints, and it's important for the people to hear. I mean, again, the devil's advocate that people would say is that there are, like you say, and we say in a little bit Yiddish, mishagoyim, a little bit nuts out there, crazy, and all of a sudden, I think that's what the level of noise from the people, or maybe like I say, it's only Congress or some lobbyists that. When you get some nut or meshuggah killing people in Long Island with a machine gun and whatever.
First, if I may interrupt for a second, it wasn't a machine gun. Okay, machine guns have been outlawed since I believe it's 1934. And so therefore, what he used, my understanding of what he used, was a handgun. It was a larger capacity handgun than most people have, but it was, it was still a semi-automatic pistol and or rifle that he used. But to try to get a hold of a fully automatic machine gun, as most people think of it, that is restricted, again, since I think it was 34.
And that's military people have that.
Military and police. And so the only way you can get one of those is by basically breaking into an armory, which, of course, hopefully are defended. But anyway, I'm sorry, Rabbi.
No, it's good. It's important, like I say, because really I'm surely ignorant of guns. They talk about calibers and automatics and semi-automatics, and it's a learning experience for me. And that's why, because people maybe don't know how the guns work, that's what they get scared of them, or even the statistics. You hear one person shooting people say, "Oh, see, guns are the problem," and of course that, like you say, if there's 200 million guns out there, I don't know how much registration. Of course, the Brady bill recently was, of course, enacted by Congress and signed by President Clinton. I don't know if this is going to put a dent into crime, or no. I don't really know what they're really trying to do. I'm not even an advocate for that. I know that the 5-day registration period, I know it didn't help. They say California has a stricter one than even what they're proposing nationally, and didn't help this person in Long Island
to
prevent him.
Most states have more than 5 days. As far as what it's going to do, it's not going to do it. As far as crime prevention, it's not going to do a thing. The criminal has never listened to any of these laws. So why think he's going to bother with a 5-day waiting period? He'll go out on the street and get one. And that's the problem. Yes, there are crazies, there are mishagoyim, and you're not going to stop that. The question is, can you defend yourself against this? Interesting point is what happened in Texas. Again, the exact date escapes me. I think it was 89, but I'm not positive. But in any case, where this crazy person rammed his truck into a McDonald's, I think it was San Antonio, but I'm, again, not positive of the city, but I know it was in Texas. Ran his truck into a McDonald's and started shooting. Now, it's interesting, one of the survivors had her firearm in her car outside. Okay? Because Texas, unlike a lot of people who think, well, Texas is the Wild West, they actually have very strict laws on carry. There is no, I don't think there's a carry conceal. But you can't carry them into almost any establishment. So she had to leave her gun out there in her car. Had she had it, and had somebody been armed on Long Island, on the Long Island Railroad, you would not have had as many people die. Maybe you would have had 1 or 2. But that would be about it. You wouldn't have had 15. Or 6 people killed and 15 injured. You wouldn't have had those kind of numbers. because somebody would have been able to stop them. And that's one of the key things, is self-preservation and preservation of the species. To do anything less than that is contradictory to almost anybody's laws.
Very good. Now we want to talk, like we said, dealing with the Jewish people, and actually in Torah also, just hunting and killing animals for the sport of it, or putting a moose's head on your wall, is really not in the line of Judaism. So that's why I think that throughout the ages, just the idea of hunting really is in a Jewish way, even though I'm not saying there are no Jewish hunters, and I don't have statistics to back them up, but just in general, the Jewish people aren't really hunters. But then, though gun control or gun ownership, as we may say here now, is how does it relate maybe for the Jewish people if they're not going to be hunters? Okay.
Well, for two things. One is, actually three. Let's talk about hunting for a quick second. I myself am not an advocate or pro hunting for the sport only, meaning you shoot an animal strictly so you can hang something up on a wall. But I think that, in fact, there are a number of Jews that I know that are hunters. They will kill a deer and hopefully slaughter it properly. And it is kosher, if I remember correctly, Rabbi, so you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But as long as you're eating the meat, what is the difference between eating deer or eating beef? Whether you do it or you have somebody who you don't even know who it is killing an animal. It's again, if you're using the meat and eating the meat, I see nothing wrong with that. As far as what other reasons any of us Jews would want a gun is twofold. One is the sport itself, and I'm not talking about going out and killing an animal. But again, be it paper targets, be it bowling pins, which a lot of clubs do have, both paper and real, what they call silhouette shooting, which is either a metal silhouette outline of an animal or person or whatever, or they use paper. Or protection. And let us not forget about protection and what has happened in the 20th century, especially. I mean, sure, we can go back to the Spanish Inquisition, we can go back to anything else. But let's take the 1930s as an example. How many people who were in either a concentration camp or who were lucky enough to survive the Warsaw Ghetto would say that they want to give up their right to self-protection? I would think not. At least I would hope not.
Well, I just know, interjecting Warsaw Ghetto, that when they needed guns, and the few people, again, not to go into the whole story, but when they rounded up the Jewish people and finally Jewish people said, it's either now or in another few days they're going to send us off to concentration camps, let's fight back. And they tried to fight back, and they were throwing literally stones at these Nazi troops, which of course were armed with the best technology, of course, and with machine guns and all this business like a regular army. They were fighting back with only few arms than they could get. They were from the criminals, from the Jewish, and there's always a few Jewish criminals, and they got it for a few guns. That's what they were fighting back with, which makes the experience even bigger, because here this bunch of nobodies with a few little arms are fighting the whole German army. But again, they didn't have, it was very hard to get arms.
That's right, because that's the first thing that a government wants to do, is take away your ability to defend yourself, which goes back to the founding fathers of this country, and that's the reason why it was in this, or why there is a Second Amendment, but even more important, why there was number 13 of the House of Burgess. It was Virginia's 20 points of individual freedom. But let's take that forward, and why would the Jews want to? Again, because of what happened there. And if those, when I say there, I'm referring to either in Germany or in Poland or anywhere else in East Europe as far as that goes. Those who think that it won't happen here, remember what happened with Randy Weaver. This was both him and what happened in Waco, Texas, and I'm sure we all remember what happened in Waco with Koresh. Now, I'm not saying that David Koresh was somebody who I agreed with, But what was he actually supposed to have done? Nobody, including Secretary Benson, ever told us. Well, they thought he did this, and they thought he might have done this, but they never really said what happened. Instead, what happened was they broke into basically his home, broke windows, and started shooting. Well, yes, if anybody breaks into almost anybody's house, they're going to try to defend it. So that's what happened there. Randy Weaver, his biggest crime was he was accused of shortening a shotgun by 1/4 of an inch for a friend of his. Unfortunately, his good friend was an undercover agent of BATF, or Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. In other words, he was talked into it. And for this, they shot his family. Not one FBI agent, not one U.S. Marshal has ever been tried, convicted, or anything else. Yet Randy Weaver, who finally did surrender, was acquitted of all charges. So don't think it can't happen here, because it can. We as U.S. citizens have to make sure that it doesn't happen here, and especially as Jews have to make sure that it never happens to us, be it here or anywhere else.
Well, I just know, to back up this idea now, I know even like Holocaust survivors, and maybe that they themselves, maybe they don't want to have killing, they don't want to know from it, but on the other hand, when it comes to gun advocacy, they're very strong for it, because, well, like you say, the main thing within Germany was that they made everybody first thing register your guns, and the Germans, that they did what they were told, almost too good, as we know in World War II.
That's right.
But the good Germans, they signed up and they registered their guns. Then a short time afterwards, that the army just knocked on the doors. You have a gun? Let's have it. Let's go. And they weren't breaking. They had to give it over. And like you say, for a totalitarian regime, they don't want armed resistance. This way, for a fascist state or criminals, they're afraid of people in their homes having guns, that they say so many times. I mean, it's really not a true, and I really shouldn't even say the true argument against the Jewish people. They say, oh, if every Jewish person killed a Nazi in World War II, they couldn't do it. 6 million Jews, 6 million Jews. Yeah, it's very nice. First of all, 1 million were children when they say that. I mean, second of all, where were the guns? I mean, you can't just say, to kill people. I mean, again, that they weren't allowed at this time for private citizens in many countries to have guns. So who are you supposed to shoot? And then, in a way, the Nazis played upon this, that they know were they dealing with innocent people that couldn't defend themselves. And in their perverted mind, they could just kill millions of kids. I mean, obviously, people weren't able to defend themselves, and this is the way they led people. So to keep, so to speak, the evil forces, so to speak, honest out there, the criminals and a fascist regime, or whatever they're going to do, it's a good thing that they know the people themselves, the grassroots people, are going to be able to defend themselves.
That's right. It's very important to be able to defend yourself in case of, and I'm not saying this is going to happen here in the U.S., but unless we keep a very diligent effort to make sure it doesn't happen, both through our own individual protection of one's self and property, and also to make sure that our legislative and our executive branch knows we are watching their moves. And even though we can vote them in, we can also vote them out. And that's one of the things I think that they have to be cognizant of. But getting back to a more realistic state of day-to-day type of living, there was a 1990, I think it was 1990, survey taken. Again, this was either by the Justice Department or the FBI, I'm not too sure which. A survey taken of criminals, of what they were afraid of. And over 68% said they did not want to break into a house where they thought somebody might have been at home, because they were afraid of coming against armed resistance. meaning the criminal isn't dumb either. They want to have the upper hand. They don't want you to have the upper hand. And if they think you might, or even an even hand, they're going to pass and go to somebody else. Well, that's my feeling. Let them pass and go to somebody else. I will protect mine, and I think it's a right for every law-abiding citizen to protect their own. And I think that's a key. That if I can take the time right now to state that, I disagree with having firearms registered, but I don't necessarily disagree with having people. I wouldn't say registered, but licensed, meaning that they have to take a 3 or 6 hour course on the range that's hands-on on a range, not like they do here in New York, which is basically I'll teach you how to play the piano, but you can't touch the keys, because you cannot touch a handgun in this state until you have a license to do so, which is ludicrous, because how are you really going to learn? Classroom is fine, but in any case, you should have this, and you should have a certain amount of classroom teaching, again, for safety. Now, once you've passed these two parts of the course, and yes, let's have a check and make sure that people aren't either convicted felons or somebody who appears, when I say appears, that where they have been institutionalized for some reason and therefore may not have total control of their faculties. Those people should not have something as dangerous as a firearm or as an automobile, as far as that goes, because there's more people killed in automobile accidents than there are in gun accidents. But that's registering the person that they have a proficiency, a safety proficiency, and knowledge. But their individual guns, no, should not be registered.
All right, very good. Well, I want to thank you, Barry Spinka, an advocate for gun usage. But again, it's not like every person should have a gun. You're not saying that also. It's not saying that we have to rise up and defend ourselves. It's just mainly the right.
That's correct. That's correct. It's your choice, but it should be your choice as a law-abiding, lawful individual.
It's not like going out and everybody get on.
I'm not saying everybody should go out there and create the OK Corral. No.
Yeah.
No,
that's important, because I think that's an important point, that many people have this idea that anybody for the NRA or these gun advocacies would love to just run around with, like you say, a 6-shooter on his belt and walk around and shoot something off the lamppost or something like that. And they're very law-abiding citizens, and you're looking for that. You're not looking for go around shooting everybody up. And
no, in fact, we're as much against those who try to shoot up the lamppost or anything else, probably more so than most people are, because it's our right, and we don't want that to be taken away. Rabbi, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for Barry. I hope people found it interesting. I surely have learned something. As much as I don't own a gun and don't shoot guns myself, but it's like I say, I understand your viewpoint. It's important for American citizens and also for the Jewish people to understand the roles of guns and firearms in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Shalom Goldstein, and he has a degree in Biblical Hebrew Studies from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Welcome to the Jewish View. Can we call you Shalom by your first name? Shalom, Shalom, we say.
Shalom, yes. Yes.
All right.
Actually, I went to the Hebrew University, but my degree is from City University of New York.
All right, so you've been in a little in Israel and
Yeah.
a little in New York. All right, still a good degree in
Yeah.
Biblical Hebrew.
Yeah,
Well, that's
absolutely.
exactly what we want to talk about is Israel, though. And, of course, Israel's always in the news. And there's major doings in Israel now, and some trepidation by many people. Of course, we're talking about the Israeli Accords that Rabin, Prime Minister Rabin, has made agreements with Yasser Arafat, the PLO chairman, and generally, maybe you want to go into the details, but for our audience, the general point, of course, is that PLO will make peace with the Israeli Jewish state in return for land, peace for land. One view of people are this is utopia. Finally, we've been making war every 10 years, in 1948, 56, 67, whatever, Yom Kippur War. Finally, there's going to be peace in the Middle East. On the other extreme is the people saying, you know, these people are terrorists. They've been killing not only soldiers, but children and civilians for many years, and to give in to them and give them cities and give them legitimacy and a government and right next to you and right while where you're living, this only spells putting more like kerosene on a flame that spells trouble for the Jewish state. And like for you, maybe since you've lived there, you know about Israel, you studied there, tell us your opinion about this peace accords.
Well, I think, first of all, although they're commonly called peace accords, I think that's a misnomer. I think what they really are is an effort, especially from the PLO side, to reverse the results of the 1967 war, in which the Arabs lost a great deal of land and military potential to wage war against Israel. Probably the greatest problem with the so-called Declaration of Principles, as it's officially known, is that it provides for the establishment of a governmental authority in the territories, that is, at this point, in the Gaza district and in the Jericho area, but also the jurisdiction of this authority under the agreement will extend actually over the entire territory of Judea and Samaria, as well as the Gaza area, so that we're not talking only about Gaza and Jericho. This authority has, this governmental authority will have the ability, once it's in place, to simply act as a government. It will act as an independent government. There is nothing standing in the way of them declaring, to somewhat simplify a bit more complicated issue, there's nothing standing in the way of, once they're in place, of simply declaring independence and saying we are now the Republic or the State of Palestine. And as a matter of fact, Arafat presently refers to himself as the President of Palestine. So this entity, this nascent government, will be able to act exactly like a government in all respects, including the ability to form a military, to bring in arms, to form alliances with the surrounding countries. Now, one of the things, for example, that they intend to do is to establish an airport, which I believe at least one in Jericho, but I think perhaps one also in Gaza. And so it will be possible to fly in terrorists, to fly in soldiers, to fly in arms. If they declare independence, it seems a virtual certainty that the entire world, not the entire world maybe, but almost the entire world will recognize this independence, and then Israel will be faced with the PLO state that borders right up into the outskirts of Tel Aviv and Netanya. This state will have the ability to, for example, form an alliance with radical elements in Jordan. It's not expected that the Hashemite dynasty that Hussein represents will be in power forever, and once an alliance, if it's swept away, an alliance can be formed between the PLO entity or even unification, the PLO entity. So what you'll have is or potentially is an Arab mass that stretches all the way from Iran to the outskirts of Tel Aviv, with the enhanced military potential of destroying Israel, of cutting it in half, right in the center of its population centers.
Yeah. Well, I don't like to be a devil's advocate, especially a rabbi. I don't think that's proper to be a devil. But in any case, let me use that role now to bring out the ideas. You say at the worst scenario, maybe it will happen that it'll be good and it'll be peaceful, the Palestinian state, and just like Canada and the United States, maybe it'll happen that these people all of a sudden will turn their guns into plowshares, and if they have an airport, it'll be used for commerce and industry, and like we say, maybe utopian, like American Canada, we live together, we're nice neighbors, we like each other. What's the possibility of this happening?
Well, I suppose there was the possibility, for example, of Saddam Hussein living up to his word that he gave for very similar reasons, which was to reverse the results of the Gulf War, which resulted in his country being occupied, and there were many prisoners, and he made certain promises to reverse this situation. But as soon as the troops were withdrawn, he attempted to renege on the promises, so that the promises were worthless. Now you have a character like Yasser Arafat, who has ordered the murder of women and children, and who has been a bloody terrorist for many years. Now we're suddenly supposed to believe that this individual has, for some undetectable reason, changed his character, especially when there really hasn't been any incentive. There really will be no incentive for him to remain peaceful, despite what some of the labor advocates say. They say that they will make it in the best interest of this PLO entity to be peaceful with Israel. But if considerations of best interest were what motivated the Arabs, they would have made peace with Israel a long time ago. So it's not a question of interest that motivates them. It's really their ideology and their firm belief that Israel has no right to exist. I think that apropos of that, for example, it's interesting that in the Accords, the PLO undertook to first of all, make a commitment that the parts of the PLO charter which call for Israel's destruction are now inoperative and no longer valid. But first of all, the PLO Executive Committee or Yasser Arafat don't have the legal authority to enter into such an agreement. So it's really an agreement with an individual who can't make that agreement anyway. So it's really meaningless, and everybody knows that.
Well, why can't he make that agreement?
He can't make that agreement because under the PLO's own bylaws, the only way that the charter can be changed is by a vote, I don't know if it's a two-thirds vote, but certainly it's a majority vote, of the Palestine National Council, which is their parliament. They're the only ones who can change the charter. Yasser Arafat, as an executive part of the PLO, simply doesn't have the authority under their own laws. So he's entered into an agreement. It's like entering. It's sort of like buying the Brooklyn Bridge from somebody who doesn't own it. So basically, what I think it's a very good comparison. He's sold Israel the Brooklyn Bridge on that score.
Well, while they're selling everything down the drain, what about Jerusalem? You haven't mentioned that, and that's always a hot topic, and Israel seemed to push it behind the table, but it's obviously going to peek its head again. You can't just keep it subdued. They just don't want to deal with it for the time being, but obviously that's not even a temporary situation. It's a very minimal situation.
Well, in the agreement, and the so-called Declaration of Principles, the famous peace accord, but I think that's certainly not what it is by any standard. under this agreement, in fact, the PLO agrees not to negotiate or not to raise the issue of Jerusalem for the first 2 years. However, on the other hand, the government of Israel agrees specifically to negotiate about Jerusalem after the 2 years. And the status of Jerusalem is included in a list of subjects to be part of the final status negotiations, which Israel has affirmatively, not just by omission, but affirmatively actually agrees to negotiate about. Now, Rabin has said that, well, at the end of the 2 years, he said, well, we'll simply come and tell them that we're not moving from Jerusalem, and that's our position, and that's the end of it. But he has, in fact, if he were to do that, he would certainly, at least technically, not be fulfilling the terms of the agreement, whereby he specifically agrees to negotiate on this subject. So this is part of it. In 2 years, under the agreement, negotiations are supposed to begin about the status of Jerusalem. And this is a very serious
Maybe
subject.
we can go into a little deeper. We're talking about the PLO and what they're thinking, what their position is. And again, maybe saying in all that, you know, if this is all they want was the West Bank, what was wrong in the Six-Day War? That they had the West Bank and they had half of Jerusalem and they had the Gaza Strip, yet they nevertheless still wanted even more. That's what the whole war was about. So again, that's another point maybe to your position, that what's going to hold them back. I mean, what was their mindset in 1967 when they wanted to go after Tel Aviv or whatever the main, if you want to call it the main body of Israel, and why are they all of a sudden content some 25 years later saying, okay, just give us the West Bank and we'll live in peace?
Well, this is very interesting because the PLO in 1974 adopted what they call their two-phase plan. To stretch that out a little bit, it was a two-phase plan for the destruction of Israel. And I might add also, by the way, that the famous PLO charter doesn't contain a few references here and there to the destruction of Israel. It happens to be a charter with 33 articles in it, and they are the entire charter. All of them are devoted in one way or another to the question of, or to the subject of the destruction of Israel. But to get back to your point, in 1974 they adopted what was called the phase plan. The phase plan is that first they will reverse the military defeat of 1967 by regaining the territory, by regaining control of the territory that they lost then, meaning Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. That would be the first part of the phase. The second part of the phase would then be in alliance, the PLO, and then in control of that territory, in an alliance with the with the surrounding Arab states, including, I'm sure, Iraq, because, by the way, Iraq has always, even in 1967, sent large numbers of troops into Jordan to fight against Israel. So what we'd find here, as I brought up before what the military situation would be, but that would be the second part of the phase. Having regained control of the strategic areas, especially the mountains running north and south through Judea and Samaria, then they would be free to mount a massive attack right at the center of Israel, to destroy it. This is the phase plan. And I think what is very interesting about that is as recently as September 1st, this last September 1st, which was only 13 days before the signing of this so-called peace accord, Yasser Arafat was saying, this is the phase plan that we've always talked about. That is what we are. That is not what we're now about. This is not what we're now doing. So this is not something that's become defunct. He raised this whole this subject again, and he reminded those within the PLO and those Arabs who oppose what he's doing that in fact what he's doing is what they had planned to do all along. So I think that this tells you something about the intentions of the PLO.
Saying that, maybe we should go on to the other side of the border, if we may, and the Rabin government and the Labor government, the Labor Party. You say it's fairly obvious. I mean, I'm sure the Israeli government has just as much access to the PLO charter as you do. I mean, no one's a fool in that sense. And they're reading it, and they see that, and they monitor what he's saying. What's in their their, if you want to call strategy, I don't know if the right word, or in their own mind, where do they come to negotiate, if we can even call them terrorists, and probably the way we're thinking about it, not a peaceful country? What led them up to it? What's on their mind? Where do they think they're going to outwit, outsmart, outmaneuver the PLO to change them, or try to change them from being terrorists and maybe to being a peaceful nation? Tell us maybe a little bit about the background, since you were in Israel, a little bit about what the Labor government, Labor Party represents in Israel.
Well, that's a very interesting subject, because what the Labor Party represents in Israel is something that members of the Labor Party have done very little to make the Jews in the United States aware of. The ideology of the Labor Party is very, except that it has a Zionist, a kind of a Zionist flavor to it, but otherwise the ideology of the Labor Party in Israel is very similar to the Socialist Bund in the United States, which is a very anti. It's anti everything that we think of as being Jewish. It's hostile to the Jewish religion. It's hostile to everything that represented Jewish culture up until that point. And as a matter of fact, they don't just exist. This all exists on paper. There are a number of theoreticians, such as Brenner, Yosef Chaim Brenner, and Ber Baruchov, and a number of other writers who have formulated their point of view. And I would like, because this is so unbelievable. I've lived in Israel, and there are members of my family who I spent time with there who were part of this movement from early on. One of them had one of the first kibbutzim named after him. Another one has a statue of him in Haifa. So I know who these people are, and I know what they think and feel. And this is summed up very well in an essay written by Brenner. And I would just like to read some excerpts,
Sure.
so that people can have some idea what we're talking about. And this was written in 1914, called Self-Criticism, and the author is Yosef Chaim Brenner. And he said, just to read some excerpts, he says, "What is our life worth? We have no inheritance. Each generation gives nothing of its own to its successor, and whatever was transmitted, the rabbinical literature, were better never handed down to us." That's what he thinks of. That's what he thinks of the entire rabbinical literature. He talks about Jews living a life in which they attempt to pile up their pennies in secret, to scratch around among the goyim, to make a living from them and complain all day long about their ill will. No, let us not pass judgment upon such a people, for indeed it is not worth it. Going on, had there been no, he talks about, who can tell us whether, had there been no universal and understandable hatred of such a strange being, the Jew? I repeat, because those words, as shocking as they are, this is the kind of ideology and the kind of atmosphere in which the labor, the leaders of the Labor Party in Israel were raised and nurtured. Well, let me read this again. He talks about the universal and understandable hatred of such a strange being, the Jew. Goes on.
So if an anti-Semite would have written it, you would have fit into like.
This is anti-Semitism. This is internalized anti-Semitism in a very gross and in my opinion disgusting expression. So here, those familiar livelihoods by which we live a dog's or a loan shark's life. Talks of Jews as simply huckstering. The Jews earn their living simply by huckstering. They live to safeguard their money and increase the interest rates. How much more beautiful and rich was the Gentile's life than his own, than the Jew's life? Talks about, again, our sick character, our meanness since the beginning of history. And then he says, but there is still room for reform, and He who confesses and makes amends will be dealt with mercifully. So it's up to us to confess and make amends. And then he comes, at the very end, he tells you, well, what the solution to this problem? What is the solution? Our urge for life whispers hopefully in our ear, workers' settlements, workers' settlements, workers' settlements. This is our revolution, the only one. So if you want to understand the mentality of the Labor Party in Israel, you have to know something about this. And for very obvious reasons, when members of the Labor Party come to the United States, even as members of the government, as leaders of the government, looking for support and looking for funds, they don't talk about this very much. But as you can see, these ideas are what motivate a very dominant part of the political scene in Israel. And this is the basic split between the right and the left in Israel. This mentality versus a mentality that's proud of Jewish history, that's proud of what Jews have accomplished, the way Jews have survived, the way the richness of Jewish life, the inner richness of Jewish life, and the beauty of Jewish life, and so what you find is two mentalities which couldn't be more different in their relationship or in the way they regard their Jewishness. And so what you have on the one side is a mentality that says that in any kind of a moral contest with anyone else, we must be wrong because our characters are flawed. This is not usually stated openly, but this is certainly what underlies the feeling. And I think that the ability so easily to make concessions which to any thinking and feeling Jew seem unimaginable are certainly rooted in this mentality and this ideology, and including even the willingness to negotiate about Jerusalem, even though that's denied in public. Anybody who reads the agreement will see that that's precisely in there. To give up Hebron, to the failure to have the inner strength, the inner conviction, even to assert that there is a Jewish claim to this land, that there is a Jewish claim to this land which is superior to the Arab claim, that Jews were thrown out of this land by Arabs, that even as late, not more than once, certainly at the time of the Arab invasion, which began in the 7th century and onwards, Jews were systematically thrown off this land. That's how Arabs got there. And once again, in 1929, the entire Jewish population of Hebron, an ancient Jewish population, was massacred. So that's why there was no Jewish population there. And in 1948, everywhere where the Arabs invaded the country and asserted dominance, asserted sovereignty, which at that time was mainly under Jordan, but also under Egypt, not a single Jew was allowed to remain. And that included the eastern part of Jerusalem, which is now so blithely referred to as Arab East Jerusalem, which is a term of Arab propaganda, because there's nothing inherently Arab about it at all.
Or international, that's another, let's be peaceful, let everybody own a little bit of it. But where was
this is not the Arab position. The Arab position is that this should be the capital of the PLO state. So there is no, the Arab position is not that it should be internationalized, but rather that it must belong to the Arabs. And I really doubt very much that Jews would be able to remain there very long under such circumstances. First of all, if they don't leave voluntarily, if the Arabs manage to regain control of it, they will certainly be driven out. And I have no doubt that many would be murdered if they resisted.
It really is shocking the way you express it, because especially even more shocking because at least sometimes when you know your enemy, a Six-Day War was like, oh, the whole world know, well, there's the Arabs and they're all against the Jewish people. So, I mean, maybe that moral confidence on everybody's part didn't help the Jewish state. They needed their military and they needed, of course, the Almighty's help. But here it's like, it's a little different kind of a thinking. Well, it's all going to be good. Everybody's like being deluded into like you say, peace accords, and behind their back something terrible is going to happen, and they won't even know it till it's all over with. At least your enemy, there's guns and you have to fight. sometimes you'll be caught blindfolded when you think you're into peace, and like you say, all of a sudden, you have a hostile new country right on your doorstep.
I think that what's going on now is probably a great deal of denial in the leaders of Israel. They simply don't want. I don't think that they have the inner conviction to hold out permanently, or they shouldn't have to hold out permanently. But I don't think that they have the inner conviction to hold out, to stay the course, to eventually, to hold out to the point where the rights, the legitimate rights of the Jewish people are finally restored, and the Jewish people have a legitimate right to to Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza area, which is Eretz Yisrael. And they don't have the inner conviction. The Arabs have no problem asserting their exclusive right to this, but the present leaders of Israel don't have this. So they say, well, what do we need all this trouble for? Well, we'll see, and besides, Jews are, not the best people in the world anyway. Well, what business do we have making claims? And this is their mentality. I remember a relative of mine from this same group when I went to Israel, and I remember one time being at his house, and I was looking at a book, and there was a picture of the Pharaoh, a Pharaoh from the Exodus. The picture of the mummy of Ramses II was believed to be that Pharaoh. And I said, isn't this amazing? You can look at his mummy. And his response to me was, well, what he did, I'm paraphrasing now, but what he did wasn't really so bad after all. The Jews never wanted to work anyway. So what you can, I'll give you a few more examples of how this expresses itself. What's come to be known as Israeli folk music is nothing but, for the most part, Russian music with Hebrew words, and they do folk dances, which are Russian and Eastern European dances. Everything that they knew to be Jewish was simply thrown out the window. That they danced with Russian peasant shirts, to Russian music. Their cultural model was the Russian peasant. That's who they wanted to emulate.
Well, Shalom, we're out of time. This is really an interesting subject. Maybe we'll have to come back again, maybe when certain things change or new happenings, and get just a recap of the latest current events over here. Hopefully it goes well for the Jewish state in Israel, and if anybody wants information or like to talk things over, they can go through me, and my name and address is on the board, and they can contact you. Yes.
I would like to make 2 points. I think that everybody who cares about this subject should read the PLO Charter. The PLO Charter defines peace, by the way, very interestingly, as the elimination of Israel. That's in Article 22. Anybody who would like a copy of this can obtain one. I would be happy to send it to them if they want to contact Rabbi Simon. And I just want to say something else, that I think that everybody who really cares about what's going on should go out and buy a shortwave radio and listen to the broadcasts from Israel, which they have in English. It's very simple. You just go buy a radio, plug it in, and listen. You might have to put a simple antenna on, but that's about it. Because a lot of facts that cast things in a very different light are not reported and are suppressed, and they give you a very incomplete, incorrect, and distorted view of what's going on. So I think that those 2 things are important.
All right, very good. All right, anybody wants that offer, wants to talk about the Israeli situation, because it is important to people, and we want to all see the best for Israel, and you don't want to be boondoggled into doing something that's ultimately going to be down the road, something very terrible and tragic for the Jewish people. So thank you very much, Shalom Goldstein, for being on The Jewish View.
It was my great pleasure. Thank you.
Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today we're going to have some interesting questions and answers from a book that I found that's called The Quizzer. Now, this book, Quizzer, is telling us about the different subjects in the Jewish education and the Jewish View. We love telling about different ideas in Judaism, so there's not really one theme. We're not going to be talking about, let's say, Jewish holidays, but there will be something about Jewish holiday, Jewish life, different things in Jewish culture. So there's really, as a smorgasbord, another thing in Jewish, chont, which is also like it's just a big stew that you throw everything in there of different ideas in Judaism. But because we're going to show pictures and because there's like a little game of question and answers, therefore we expect it to be fun. And so if you're a child, bring over your parents. If you're a parent, bring over your child, because it's good for everybody. And without further ado, we'll get into the question and answers. The answers in this book are very simplistic. They're one or two word answers. There still needs some explanation behind it, and of course that's why you have me for, is just to explain the different ideas behind these one or two word answers that the book would give. So without further ado, like I say, Jacob, which he calls Yaakov in this book, Jacob, what yeshiva, where did he learn? Now it's interesting to note that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, as we all know, but that was like hundreds of years later after Jacob lived. So what did Jacob learn? How was he Jewish? So the answer is as follows. They're really these ideas that are in the Chumash or the Bible, they were really always given even from the beginning of time. But they never were written down. They weren't like in a study session as we would have today, or surely there's a bookstore. So there was learning, and Jacob actually learned in the school that Shem is one of the sons of Noah, and Eber was another great-grandson of Noah. He set up another learning center, and that's where Jacob learned. So there was always learning, even by the patriarchs, even before the giving of the Torah. All right, we're going to go across here. Now, this is interesting, and we've talked about this a few times on the Jewish View, that many times that in life, people say, oh, thank God if I win the lottery or something, I got out of the hospital. But even the simplistic things that we do every day, of just opening up our eyes and we could see that we're so aware of our own selves and all the thankful for the gifts that the Almighty has given us, that therefore there's blessings to be said every morning. One of them, and this is the question here, what blessing do you say on putting on your clothes? Because again, I think it's so simplistic. No one thinks, oh, great, I put on my shirt today. Or it's nothing outstandingly special, of course. But if you're thinking about it, it is a blessing, because thank God that we have clothes on. And then some people are so poor or whatever have you. So even the most simplistic, basic needs of a person, thank God I'm alive, thank you that I have clothes, thanks I can open up my eyes, and so on, are all set in the blessing. So Malbish Arumim is the proper answer here, that thank the one, the Almighty, for giving the clothing to the people who need them. So that's interesting. Now, like I say, he really skips around here, so you're going to have to skip around with the book like myself. Now he says, what is the Shabbos called Chazon? The Shabbos, of course, comes on Saturday every single week. But there's sometimes, if it's a special Shabbos, there's something read on the Sabbath, or there's something doing on the Sabbath. It's nicknamed in the calendar. So he wants to know, what is this special Sabbath that's nicknamed Shabbos Chazon? And Shabbos Chazon, the answer is the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. Now, Tisha B'Av is the 9th day of Av. It's the most mournful day of the Jewish calendar. It's the anniversary when the temples in Jerusalem were destroyed. And fitting to that, the Haftarah, the prophets that are read on the Sabbath, are fitting to that time of year. Chazon, it really stands for vision, and it's the first words of Isaiah that stands for the vision of Isaiah. And it's always read on the Sabbath before Tisha B'Av. So that's an important point for us to remember. Of course, we should only know from happy occasions, and we don't like to think about Tisha B'Av throughout the entire year, but in any case, that is knowledge, so we have to learn it. Now here's a very interesting thing. First, I know there's many non-Jewish viewers, and they're always welcome to look inside of the Jewish view and understand things maybe of their own religion, and also just for the sake of expanding their horizons about Judaism. And the word, but this is one specific one that really has to do with other religions. Amen is, of course, such a popular word in all prayers. But on the other hand, it really is a Hebrew word. And what does it mean? What does this word amen mean? Well, really in Hebrew you say amen, or sometimes Sephardic pronounces amen. A little bit different, but obviously the same word. And what does it mean? And so it's really an acronym of, there's three Hebrew words, I guess three Hebrew letters, excuse me, the Aleph, Mem, and Nun. And they're made of Kel, Melech, Namon. God is the faithful God. So therefore, or the faithful king maybe is more of a literal exact translation. But in any case, therefore, when a person says it, you'll understand your Joe. Amen, amen. Just answer things when you want to answer it, whatever in your services. But here, this is an idea that is really made up of some Hebrew words. Maybe will make some more meaning for people who say it also, now that they learned about it, of course. We always like to put more meaning into things. If you understand the reasons, of course, obviously you understand and appreciate things better. This is a famous rabbi. Maybe people don't know about him, though. This is, where did Rabbi Shimon bar Yohai? Rabbi Shimon bar Yohai was the author of the Zohar. Maybe that's a little bit more familiar to people. That's a basic word of the Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism. It was a very great rabbi, and the answer is buried in Meron. And that in itself isn't such a big news, because we're not going through where everybody is buried in Israel, because that, for some people, is any case a tourist attraction. Many of the famous people where you read about, of course, the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the matriarchs are all buried in Hebron. I don't know how many people are going to visit there. The trouble is that it's always a source of violence, so it's maybe not the biggest tourist attraction that it should be. But in any case, that is one of the things that people go around, I know, in tour guides, and they take them around to Israel to look at the famous graves of different people throughout history. And Israel, of course, was always the center of history. But in any case, what's more important about this rabbi is that since he was so great, and people feel, and Judaism always feels that even though a person's dead, they're not like dead and gone and goodbye and good luck. They're not more around. Well, physically, of course, they're not around, but spiritually their soul is still around, and their prayers, and you don't pray to these people, you only pray to one God, but of course that they can intercede on our behalf. On Lag B'Yomer, in the middle, it's about the spring, about April, May, that people go to Meron, where I just told you where he's buried, and they have the big parties, bonfires, not in a frivolous way like firecrackers, but in a deep sense, and then they, like I say, they have bonfires, and they sing songs, and it's a very big experience. So if you're ever around there, it's like the 33rd day after Pesach, Passover, they literally get 100,000 people. It's a real happening over there, and that's why the inner idea why he's hinting to this, where he's buried. Now, we've said it before, but of course we'll say it again, there's no problem, that on the Sabbath the Torah is read, and actually that's the 5 books of Moses in the scroll form. And you can, by reading it through, you get through the Torah in 1 year. So obviously, actually there's 54 portions of the Torah, and sometimes if there's less weeks, then they just combine a few portions. So they read a little bit of a portion every year, every week, and get through the whole Torah once a year. Now his question is, in the quizzer, that when do you bring out 3 Torahs? Meaning if it's a special Sabbath, as we said before with Shabbos Chazon, even though that's not it has a special name, there are certain Sabbaths where you would take out 2 Torahs, and sometimes 3. And he wants to know what are the times then you take out 3 Torahs on one Sabbath. Well, there has to be a special occasion, so the first answer is Simchas Torah. Actually, I just told you that we finish the Torah every year. And on the very last day of the holiday of Sukkot, so around the end of September, and probably more into October for most years, that we finish the Torah that day. When we finish that Torah, that's when you take out 3 Torahs, because there are 3 subsections that have to be read. Since there are 3 places that have to be read, they take out 3 Torahs to make it easier for people. Another time is when Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month, which Again, in English, I don't know if we can parallel such a thing because, let's say, on a February 1st, of course, maybe people switch over their calendars and they, go to the next month. But I don't know. I'm trying to even think right now why anybody makes a special hoo-ha about now it's February 1st or March 1st or whatever. Maybe you ever guess April Fool's, but it's not because April 1st is that special night. Nothing special about any, July 1st, August 1st. So it's a new month. So like I say, you flipped your wall calendar to the next month. Judaism, it's not that way. At the beginning of a Hebrew month, it's I wouldn't call it a full holiday, let's call it a semi-holiday. There's extra prayers to be said, the Torah is written, and there's different customs. We can't go into everything here. Suffice it to say it's a little bit of a semi-holiday more than it would be an English equivalent to our English calendars. So therefore, if Shabbos it comes, of course, it's Shabbos. It could be Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is 8 days, so obviously there has to be a Sabbath in the Saturday in there somewhere. And if it happens to be the first day of the month, you take out 3 Torahs. The next time would be the first day of Adar, because there's also another special Shabbos, Parsha Shkolim, and then also Parsha Rosh Chodesh. So that's Nisan, which is a month afterwards, right before Passover, and that would be your 4 occasions where you may. Now, the first one, Simchas Torah, you surely should. The other 3, if it happens to fall those days, the first day of the month, happen to fall out on Saturday, then that would happen. But Simchas Torah always 3 days. So if you ever see you go to synagogue and then you see 3 Torahs, you'll know and you'll be educated, and you'll remind yourself you heard it here on the Jewish View. Don't you hear? So now there's only one God, of course, in Judaism. It was the founder and only religion that is monotheistic. But on the other hand, God has many names. So the question is, how many names does he have that cannot be erased? Holy names. And this is where you get this idea from, where people put G-D, because you're not supposed to blot out the name of God. It's not honorable. So even people will carry that, and it's true that they should carry it out even to English or whatever language they happen to be writing or speaking. You don't write out fully. It's not that you shouldn't write it out so much as that if it gets erased or thrown in the garbage or whatever have you, that wouldn't be respectful to God's name. Now the answer is it's 7. Meaning, and I just want to get into a little bit of philosophy. Again, like I say, sometimes these questions I can talk a half hour and we can have a discussion and here on the Jewish View for even one of these answers. But suffice it to say, we have to move on, and I'll give about a 1-minute discussion about a very deep subject. In any case, that if there's one God, why are there so many names? And we just said there's 7 holy names. I mean, either way. So it's anyway that names are the way that a person relates to the people they're calling their names. Like, name is nothing for yourself. You're a whole person even if you didn't have a name. Would you be lacking? You didn't have an arm, you'd be something wrong with you. But if you didn't have a name and you're the only person around, would it make a difference? You're still the 100% person you were before. So the answer is that you need names for somebody else. If you're in a crowd and they say, hey Joe, hey Shmo, hey Moshe, whatever it happens to be, that we have to have a handle on a person to call to them. So that's what God also has names for us to call. But it's still, it doesn't make a difference to the one God, but it's still that he's different the way he relates to us. Almost like water in colored glasses. You look into a water in a red cup, it looks red. Green cup, it looks green. You don't know if it's ginger ale or it's water. And the reason is because we're looking at, not at the water, we're looking at through the glass. Same thing with God, the way he relates to us, his name changes. So a little bit of deep religious philosophy there, and I hope that sweetens the ideas up, people enjoy. Who had to learn 70 languages in one night? Well, that was our friend Joseph in Egypt, because since he was, as you say in Yiddish, a macher, but I don't want to, a person who does a lot of things in Yiddish, you say is a macher, he's all over, but since he did, once he became second to the chief of Paro, he had to relate to everybody, and they didn't relate so much to translators. He had to know exactly what was happening. And something's always lost in translation, as we all know, and therefore that's something that we have to understand. That different things of the humanity of the Jewish Sanhedrin, Jewish court, to be on the high court like Supreme Court Sanhedrin, even though I know there's 9 justices in of course, in America, United States, in the High Court in Israel. And I'm not talking today, because they have a Supreme Court also, but I'm talking in ancient Israel. They had 70 people on their High Court, and each one had to know 70 languages, and it's the same reason why. Why do you have to know so many languages? Maybe you have to know law. You don't have to know languages. Be a linguist. But the answer is that what if someone would come from, let's say, Spain, who knows, and could talk a different language, and they would come to Israel. Well, of course, if you didn't know Spanish, you'd have to rely on a translator. And it was like we just said, languages always get mistranslated, or things are lost in translation, as everybody says. So therefore, this could be a life and death situation here. And you're relying on the testimony of somebody you don't even hear firsthand or understand firsthand. This wouldn't be really the proper way to conduct a court. I mean, you don't put people to life and death or difficult situations or whatever have you because of this idea. And therefore, what we want to say here is clearly is that the Torah, again, another pitch to say is how humanistic it really is, that they just don't, cut off their head, that kind of idea, without a fair and full trial. Even a fair, that's why I say that even more than you have in any other country. Moving on. Now, people know their Bible would like this question: how were Abraham and Lot related? How were they related? That they were actually, Lot was Abraham's brother's son, so made him his nephew. Follow that. Lot was Abraham's nephew. So, someone wants to say, you want to ask someone that, then you can really stump a lot of people if you're friends with these questions. Now, as we once said before, here where my finger is, the Torah is made on a scroll. You can read it out of a book, of course, and there's many books that are written about the Bible, and it is written in the Bible, actually, of course, to throw in our own little question. Even I'm sure you know the answer if I'm saying it. What's the #1 bestseller? Of course, that's a good question here because our studios are in the Bethlehem Library. So we talk about the library book. What's the #1 bestseller in all of human history? And of course, the Bible is always the #1 answer. But you can read it out of a book. But when, like I said, we were talking about reading the Torah in the synagogue on Sabbath or on holidays, they do not read it out of a book. They read it out of scrolls, and it's made written on parchment. And as you see here, there's two pieces of wood that are the holders of the scroll. Actually, it was one of our questions last time. What are they called? The scrolls are called the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, because it's a tree of life. We'll hold on to them. On the other hand, he says which one goes first is the one on the right. Hebrew, of course, another little bit language question. Hebrew is written and read, of course, from right to left. Not so English, left to right, of course. And Hebrew is right to left. So the right one is the top, and therefore the right scroll should be on the left. All right, very good. Now, it's very interesting, is where my finger is pointing, the little boy is praying with his tefillin on, that the height and the climax of the prayers is the Shimon Esrei. Shimon Esrei stands for 18, and that's when people stand up and put their feet together at attention and ask for their needs. Now, there's 19 blessings in all. 19, you just said that the whole name means 18. Well, one was added later, and that's this big question here. Which blessing was added in later? I don't know if you know, but it's actually one in the middle. It's not at the beginning or end, or you'd say the one tacked on at the end, but it's not simple. It's not that simple at all. The 19th would be the Al Malshinim in Hebrew, which is the one for traders. I mean, they had all the human needs. You want intellect. Hopefully people want that. They want money, and they want health. And, of course, these are the basic needs of a person. But on the other hand, not only is the basic need that they found out that traders were very difficult, because if you have a trader amongst your midst, well, then, especially nowadays is one thing to have a trader. They sell a few secrets to Russia, China, whatever have you. But in the olden days, they didn't play games. A person's trader, they'd turn in a whole group of people. They'd put them to death. And therefore, that was a very difficult situation. So it's a prayer that should keep us away from all the people who are traitors against us. Now, this is very interesting. We once said that there are 613 commandments in the Bible. Now, this is not even the question here, but look, that's what I say you have me to put in all this filler information. There are only 207 that are relevant today out of the 613. Where's the, you're going to immediately ask, of course, what's about the other 400 or so? Well, many of them deal with sacrifices, and sacrifices are irrelevant today because you can only bring them at the time the temple was standing in Jerusalem. There's only western walls left of that temple, and for the last 2,000 years or so. So therefore, sacrifices are irrelevant. But that's not even his question. His question, how many of the 613 are positive? And the one number of positive ones are 248 positive commandments. 248 positive commandments. And that's out of 613. 248 is another number. I know it maybe doesn't fit exactly what medical sciences says, but there are 248 limbs or bones to the person. Well, I know that they're not exactly, I don't even know what medical science is, 208. I'm not that sure, but I know it's not 248. But the differences could be because there's different skull bones. There's many different bones that you can say they're joints. They're actually made up of a few. Sometimes you call them one, sometimes you call them many. So it's really pretty much the same idea that there's that many bones in a human person. And these 248 bones that a person really has corresponds to each one of the mitzvahs. So every time we do a commandment in one of our limbs, we are connected to the Almighty. All right, we're rolling on here. There's so much to learn. I mean, of course, I always say there's a side benefit to our learning that we see we could take one subject or many different subjects, and there's really so much to talk about. And just to wet your whistle, many times people think that Judaism is shallow, or I don't know what, a bunch of fairy tales maybe that they learned in the Hebrew school. But there really is, it's a deep philosophy. There's a lot of culture. There's a lot of tradition. It's been around for over 3,000 years. And there's really what to learn. And number one, it's like I like to say always here, that it's also fun and exciting to learn. People will have an idea that they don't know what they're happening in Judaism. Therefore, of course, like I say, you don't know what's happening, you don't understand, may become dull and becomes non-exciting, but unexciting. But the other hand, we're trying to make it exciting, we're trying to make it fun, and therefore, the more you understand, the more you'll like it, and therefore, it's an interesting subject in its own right. Without further ado, we will go on. Which biblical personality was considered like a pig? Well, actually, we said this question before in a different sense. Actually, we said in order to be kosher for a Jewish person to eat, that something had to have split hooves. An animal has to have split hooves, and it has to chew its cud. Well, that takes in a cow, a deer, and a goat. It takes in other animals also. Once we're on the subject, of course, we're on a tangent here. But still, once I'm saying it, that it's actually a giraffe is kosher animal. And there's a buffalo is a kosher animal. They're not eaten today, but they fill the requirements of split hooves and, of course, chewing their cud. Now, the pig has only one. It's split hooves, meaning that it shows its hooves when it bows, but it looks like it's bowing, but when it crouches, it sticks out its paws and shows its split hooves. And so it's saying, look, I'm kosher, but it doesn't chew its cud. Therefore, the pig is not kosher. And that's what personality in the Bible had this kind of characteristic, that it showed that, oh, look, I'm kosher, I'm good, but really inside it was no good. And that was Esau, that's Jacob's twin brother, because he fooled his father and said, look how good I am, but really he was a no good person inside of himself. Well, we're really skipping around, like I say, son. I don't like really doing it myself. I like to keep it in one line of reasoning, but we'll follow the book here. And he says, we're talking about the Sukkot holiday. On the Sukkot holiday, we hold the 4 kinds of palm branch and the myrtle. And, well, actually, that's his question before I go on. How many myrtles do you put on? That's called hadassim in this book in Hebrew. How many myrtles do you hold? And the answer is 3. Just to finish off the subject, there's 1 palm branch, 3 myrtles, we just said, 2 aravos, which are willows, and 1 esrog, which is called a citron. Okay. All right, a little bit of we call this a Jewish trivial pursuit. but really is. What is the last word in the whole Bible? All right, anybody know? Give you 3 seconds. All right, time's up. In any case, the word is Yisroel, B'nai call Yisroel, in the eyes of all the Jewish people. Jewish people are the last word in the Holy Bible. Now there's a beautiful poem, Eishes Chayil, a woman of valor who can find. Again, opposite of what many people think, said women are held in low degree and second-class citizens. I don't know how many times we've talked about this on the Jewish View, but if you give an opportunity, I'll have to talk about it another million times, because it's just one of the many falsehoods people think about Jewish culture, is that women are second-class citizens. And this, until everybody gets away from this misunderstanding, we'll have to repeat it here and educate people, and have you educate them, if once you hear it, that it's absolutely not true. Jewish women and women in general are considered on the highest platform in Judaism, and are very well regarded. And many times, and we don't have it, like I said, that truly is a subject in itself. And I don't even think one show would be enough to go through all the examples. But again, like I say, in 1 minute, let's suffice it to say that Jewish women are something not only equal to men, but in Jewish ideas that are superior to men. And here's a whole poem that's made up of a canonized Bible, and that's what he wants to say, where is it? Where do we say the Eishes Chayil, the woman of valor, who can find? And it goes on, and I'll just give you a little homework if you're that interested in it. It's in Proverbs, or you call it Mishlei in Hebrew, Proverbs chapter 27. Anybody that interested would be able to look it up, or if they want to contact me, we'll go over it together. It doesn't make a difference. I'm always open to educate. And in that case, that people would be able to learn, and they will see the idea of what Jewish women are held in the highest esteem. So, always a commercial about everything, but I wanted to bring that in since he brought this in. Now he says, Consumian says that you ever hear that person's head and shoulders above somebody else, meaning he's so much greater than somebody else? Actually, I saw that interesting. Someone wrote a whole big article about how that certain phrases that we say in American culture or in English are really biblical, found in biblical phraseology. And here's one right here. Person's head and shoulder above somebody else. It's actually a phrase in the Bible. And his question here is, of course, who's he talking about? And it's actually the first king, that's King Saul. King Saul was actually not only, head and shoulders, he really was taller than everybody else, but not only that, his head, his mind was above everybody's. He actually was a great personality. He messed up, if people know their Bible afterwards, but that's a whole subject in itself. Like I say, every time I say something, it's a subject in itself, but it really is, and we don't have the time to get into it now. But let's say, suffice it to say, he was a very great man. Now, who in the Bible was an archer, was good with the bows and arrows? And that was Yishmael, and Yishmael, that was the brother, or the older brother of Isaac, and he was good at archering and hunting. So, now, a little bit trivial now, just to know your calendar, because the Jewish calendar is interesting in its own right. Which days can Yom Kippur not fall on? One of them is Sunday. Sunday, because that they arrange the calendar in such a way, because if you're going to eat on Saturday and you go right immediately into a fast day, Sunday wouldn't go too much from a Saturday night. So they said that's out. Tuesday, they have Rosh Hashanah on Sunday and Monday, therefore Yom Kippur would be the 10th day of the new year, and that would have to be the day after Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the first day, the second day, and then let's even say it's Sunday, Monday, then Wednesday, the week later, would be Yom Kippur, if you're following me, the 10th day. In any case, it's Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Those are the names. Yom Kippur can come out on Saturday, and even though Saturday is such a big mitzvah, it's also such a big thing to eat. Nevertheless, if Yom Kippur comes on Saturday, you have to fast. In any case, one more for the road, as we say, a little more understanding. Well, I think this is obvious when I was looking this over beforehand, so therefore, I don't know why we put it here, but it's good to understand midos, our emotions, our character. That's also part of Judaism. You can't just have knowledge, but you have to be a good person also. What's more insulting with slapping someone in the face with the front of your hand or back of your hand? I think it's obvious to any person, the back of your hand. But the point is that a person is shamed, and it's not only the hurt that you do to a person, It's also the shame that you do to a person also. And that's also, again, how humanistic Judaism is. You don't hurt people, of course, but on the other hand, it's also, you don't even want to shame them. And shaming, you don't shame another human being. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. We covered a lot of different subjects, holidays, culture, history, and hopefully you had a lot of fun and found out a lot more information. Thank you very much.